DeepSeek alerted the world to the fact that China can produce advanced AI, and now a sporting event has suggested they've made similar leaps when it comes to robotics.
This is Tiangong Ultra setting off on a world-first humanoid robot half-marathon in Beijing. 20 other robots of varying shapes and sizes joined thousands of human runners in the 21-kilometer-long race.
There is a kind of sportsmanship, whether it's humans or robots, they're all exercising. It feels like I'm watching the development of machines, the development of artificial intelligence.
The event was hosted in an area of the capital called E-Town, which is a government-backed hub for high-tech manufacturing. China is aiming to lead the global race in cutting-edge technology.
For me, I think in about 5 years' time, these products will begin to appear in everyday life and in the family home. There may be certain limitations on their capabilities at first. It's impossible for them to do all the housework for you, like a maid, but their capabilities will improve.
Now, that might look more funny than impressive to some degree. But I think the idea here is that sort of once you combine robotics with sort of self-learning AI, then you can get somewhere really powerful, because you end up with embodied knowledge, embodied AI, and then we really don't know where it's going to go. The Guardian has an interesting report this weekend on the development of so-called embodied AI, which say the technology is reshaping daily life in China. Now, it includes a description of a group of young people getting food delivered via drone. So they say a drone loaded up with goods from a shopping mall less than 3 kilometers away flies into view and earshot, hovering over the delivery station for a moment before steadily lowering and depositing the goods into a sealed box that can only be unlocked by entering the customer's phone number. Dinner is served with not a human in sight. Meituan aims to beat human delivery times by about 10%, although perhaps because of its journey whizzing through the clouds in a thin polystyrene box. The food, char siu pork, and a waffle is slightly cold. So there's a severe downside there to getting your food delivered by drone, but you can see how the technology could develop to be fairly impressive and, ultimately ubiquitous if you get everything delivered by a drone. The article also mentions an event at this year's Spring Festival Gala. Now, it was a troupe of humanoid robots doing some very impressive human-like synchronized dancing. This has apparently been viewed billions of times. This one is somewhat scary, I suppose. It looks a bit like a sort of robot army, but just for now, dancing. I suppose when you give them AI capabilities, you don't know what they're going to do next. This is also a very enjoyable video of robot dogs. They're apparently now a big deal. So you can see here a robot dog playing with the now outdated kind, I suppose, made of flesh and blood. One looks more cuddly. The other one will require you to pick up less of its shit, presumably. The combination of robotics with artificial intelligence is still fraught with challenges. This is from the Guardian piece again. The industry is still fraught with challenges. I suppose I stole that line from them. Any AI model requires reams of data for training, while LLMs used for things like chatbots can draw upon the vast universe of content that is the internet. The data for robotic AI models, such as information on how to physically move through space and interact with objects or people, is relatively scarce. In the world of autonomous vehicles, another sector that China is focusing on, a car needs to be able to navigate through 6 axes or degrees of freedom, forwards and backwards, left and right, up and down, and the rotations between these positions. The same goes for general robotics, such as Meituan's food delivery drones. For a humanoid robot to be able to mimic a human in everyday tasks, such as cooking, it needs up to 60 degrees of freedom. So they're saying there, if you give AI a humanoid robot, if you try and get that to teach itself how to behave in the world, it needs to be able to sense and move in 60 directions. Whereas if you're a car, it's 6 directions. You've just come from China, David. Did you see any impressive embodied AI?
Yeah, I think so. I spent 10 days there. I was between Shanghai and Beijing, meeting with a lot of scholars and journalists and activists and NGOs across the country. And the sense that I got is, I was in town for this Beijing marathon of the robots, and is less of the static picture we get of Chinese technology and more about the dynamic one. You could go to Seoul or Tokyo or other places that to a London resident or even to someone living in New York, feel quite futuristic. I mean, feel really developed in terms of the displays of lights and skyscrapers that you see developed. The difference in China now is a sense that things are changing really, really rapidly. The speed and the scale and the scope of technological innovation is unmatched, is unparalleled in human history, and that's felt also in people and conversations and a certain sense of the Chinese model of development. I mentioned at the outset of this program that despite every effort by the Trump administration to menace the Chinese, to launch the harshest economic measures they can against their perceived geoeconomic adversary, even potentially escalating that to a kind of civilizational war, whether that's expelling Chinese academics and students from universities or calling on Palantir to lead a new opium war against the Chinese, or denigrating Chinese labor as mere peasants, as Vice President J.D. Vance has done. There's a sense in which China has already moved so far along the path of industrial development and technological innovation capacity that the ball's moving. That even in the context of these harsh tariffs, China can not only withstand and survive them, of course, having to make really serious adjustments to its model of consumption, as many macroeconomic analysts have pointed out, making adjustments to its trade flows, as the tariffs would imply, that there's a sense in which the Chinese economy has achieved a degree of economic sovereignty and industrial force and capacity, that these processes of development, whether it's on artificial intelligence and robotics, or indeed on transportation, as has become famous through the high-speed rail network, have a momentum of their own. I think that generates a lot of excitement and enthusiasm among the Chinese population. Of course, it generates a lot of anxiety and angst, I think, also seeing these robots, which, Michael, you rightly point out, look as friendly as they do, terrifyingly capable of unmanned violence. But I think there is a certain sense in which the extent to which these technologies have already been deployed to improve people's lives is really exciting, and that we don't know. It's so rare, I think. Speaking here as a U.S. citizen and someone who spent a lot of time living in England, that where everyone is convinced that nothing but downward mobility confronts us in the years and decades ahead, that it's impossible to imagine a future that is somehow enriched by these technologies as opposed to scraped away in new forms of exploitation by our own ruling and capitalist class, to be in a place where the sense is the sky is kind of the limit, that we don't even know what's possible in terms of innovation, and we don't know how much human flourishing can be enhanced by these technologies. That's a really exciting conversation to be privy to, because the one we're having in the West is how doomed are we at the hands and the whims of these tech companies that do not have our best interest at mind. So I think it's very exciting to see that come together. I think that the noodles delivered by these drones will go from cold to increasingly hot as they develop the novel technology to deliver it on time and for the consumer's benefit. But certainly, really taking seriously that however much we predict a certain doom for the Chinese economy because of its existing model and integration to the world economy, because of its investment in industrial capacity or investment in infrastructure, these things are already bearing fruit. I think we should take them really seriously and understand all of the technological innovation and industrial capacity in the context of the trade war that we discussed earlier. It is not the case, as it was in 1971, that these other countries don't have partners from whom they can source important technologies, for whom they can rely to build out their own source of sort of renewable energy. China, we should expect, as patient as they are, not trying to make any sudden moves in this current environment. I think we should expect for a lot of these technologies, with enthusiasm, to be able to be put at tremendous use and service in terms of the development of the world at large. And that gives me a ray of optimism in a very, very bleak set of circumstances that prevail over the world economy. And I hope that more people, more listeners, more viewers take a keen interest to what exactly is happening in China and what it might mean for the world beyond the Guardian headlines or beyond the saber rattling of the State Department.
Do you think, I don't have strong opinions on this, it's a genuinely open question. So the way you were talking about that, it seemed as if you thought that sort of takeaways delivered by drones in China would be much more liberatory for humanity, I suppose, and human flourishing than drones delivering takeaways in the United States. Do you think that's the case?
Well, I think it's a very interesting discussion. I think that we can go immediately to what would be the consequences of the sort of automation of industry. So let's go back to the Trumpian model that you were highlighting in the segment about the trade war. So there's been a big debate, as many of your viewers and listeners will have seen for themselves, a big debate about the logic or illogic of the Trump trade war, the Trump tariffs, of this articulated vision that the world is ripping off the United States and that we need to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Now, what's remarkable about that is not the tariff. That's a very sound view that the United States has allowed its industrial base to erode through a model of globalization that has prioritized over outsourcing to cheap labor markets, right, that have benefited mechanically at the cost, if not intentionally at the cost, of the U.S. working class share of income in the United States. But what's interesting in the United States is there is no industrial policy. There's no policy that can complement these tariffs to actually bring industry, to invest in the country, to build the infrastructure that could actually put people to work, actually have them do things with their hands, as Trump likes to glorify these old industrial workers. And if you ask the architects of this trade policy or this economic regime in the United States what they hope for, they're saying, oh, we're going to bring back car factories, but it's all going to be robots. And don't worry, we'll have jobs for a few people, not necessarily college educated, to oversee those robots in the factories. Right? So even in their wildest dreams, for these Trumpists who are overseeing this very nostalgic policy of bringing back manufacturing to the United States, there's still no place for U.S. American workers in it. It's not as if there's an idea that we're going to be innovating, robotifying, automating, getting industry excited about investing in the United States. Certainly there's no public investment on the horizon, but even the private investment, there's still no vision in which the millions of unemployed, underemployed people, who are suffering from job insecurity in the United States will be rewarded by this new model, right? There's no redistribution or no plan for a public employment. There's no plan for a basic income that could be provided to people who are sort of negatively impacted by processes of automation. So yes, I do think in the case of China, which has a more articulated vision of how it hopes to deploy labor and put people in service of a developmental project, that there is a different sort of distributional impact that we might imagine from a drone that flies consumer goods or food, in this case, to a U.S. American consumer or a Chinese consumer. One of the big debates we had in China when we were there was, is China a socialist country? It's a very interesting debate when such a high proportion of Chinese workers are in the private sector. Something like 80 or 90% of Chinese workers are working for private enterprises, although that could challenge the categorization around what private enterprise really means. So it's not as if there's no displacement or people aren't, China has so many people who are working in food delivery alone. So what happens to those workers if they were to be automated? But what is true, in contrast to the West, is that there is a plan, there's a vision that's being articulated for how to develop this country and then share the fruits of that development across rural and urban, east, west, north, and south parts of the country. And that type of serious strategic industrial thinking, we just don't have in the West. Right? This is a symptom, a morbid symptom of our model of hyper liberalized, hyper deregulated capitalist political economy that basically says, okay, we can make these huge gestures of protectionism from the state, but we have no way, if we're going to couple that with hyper deregulation domestically, we have no way to make the gains, however partial they may be, from that protectionism actually work at the service of US or UK or European workers.